What if I told you that the real appearance of the Messiah was hidden for 2,000 years? That the image you carry in your mind is not the same as the true story tried to show us? For centuries, a narrative has been carefully shaped to move away from a detail that could completely change the way we see faith, spirituality, and the Bible itself. Imagine for a moment, what if the Messiah were a black man, a leader whose real image was erased by religious and political interests? Why was this truth hidden so carefully? And above all, what does the church not want you to find out? This is not just another video about biblical mysteries. Here, let's dive into a secret that has the power to shock even the most scholars of Scripture. A secret that was locked in 7 keys over millennia, drowned out by translations, distortions, and convenient interpretations. We are talking about the true identity of the most influential man in history, Jesus Christ, whose image, over time, has been transformed to adapt to dominant ideologies and cultures. But what if the Bible, archaeology, and the story itself kept clues that reveal a black Messiah, completely different from what was shown to the world? Isn't it curious that the color of the skin of Jesus is one of the topics least addressed by religious leaders? Most prefers to ignore the historical and cultural context of the first century Middle East. But the truth is between the lines, hidden in ancient reports, in apocryphal books, and even in little red passages from Scripture. And when this truth begins to surface, what can it cause? Are you ready to face something that can shake the foundations of what you have always believed? This video is not for the weak of heart. It is for those seeking the truth without fear, for those who are tired of ready answers and distorted versions. Because believe me, there is a reason why this information never came to you. There is a reason why the Messiah's image has been Europeanized over the centuries. It is not just aesthetics, but of power, cultural, and spiritual domination. When they control the way you see Jesus, they also control the way you understand God and yourself. And that's exactly why we need to talk about it now. In recent years, archaeological studies, ancient texts, and historical research have revealed surprising aspects of Christ's real appearance. Details that were hidden by nearly 2 millennia are being unearthed, and the emerging image is completely different from what we see in paintings and sculptures in the churches. Can this revelation change the way you see faith? If you think this is just another controversial video, wait until you hear the evidence we are going to present. Get ready for a journey through forgotten history, the biblical passages that are never read in the pulpits, and the clues left by the early Christians. Are you ready to break free from a manufactured view? Are you ready to find out what was kept secret for almost 2,000 years? Before continuing, I want to know, have you heard about the Black Messiah? Leave your comment by saying if this idea has already crossed your mind or if this is completely new to you. Share this video with someone who also needs to know this hidden truth. And if you really look for answers beyond the obvious, subscribe now and activate the bell, because what we will reveal today can be the most impactful content you have ever seen. Now, let's start unraveling this mystery. And now I want to hear you. What do you think about all that we have just revealed? Have you ever stopped to reflect that the image of the Messiah we see out there can be completely distant from the biblical and historical truth? Leave your comment below and share your opinion, because your point of view is critical to continuing to unravel these mysteries together. If this content is making sense to you and has opened your mind to new perspectives, be sure to leave your like. This helps YouTube to understand that this theme is relevant and makes this message reach more people who are also looking for the truth. Also, when you leave your like, you are telling us that you want to see more content like this, full of revelations and deep reflections. And of course, if you are not subscribed to Anjali Celeste yet, now is the perfect time to subscribe. Activate the bell to receive all notifications, because here we are not afraid to talk about what many hide. Each video is a new opportunity to learn something transformative, something that can change its way of seeing faith and the spirit world. Comment, like, subscribe, and share this video with whom you believe you need to know this truth hidden for 2,000 years. Let's together form a bus community truth speakers, people who are not content with superficial answers and want to go further. You are part of it. Now get ready, because the next point will bring this revelation to an even deeper level. Few know, but historical studies, apocryphal texts, and archaeological discoveries suggest that the true appearance of the Messiah can be very different from what most of us have learned to imagine since childhood. Is it not strange that for almost 2,000 years, the image of Jesus was portrayed in a way that pleases the cultural and political interests of dominant societies? In Renaissance paintings, we see a European man, light-skinned, blue eyes, and light brown hair. But does this make sense within the historical context of the Middle East of the 1st century? Are we not facing one of the greatest distortions in history, carefully built to shape people's perception? The question is controversial because it touches directly on the roots of faith and the way history has been narrated over time. When we talk about a black Messiah, we are not only addressing the physical appearance of Jesus, but also questioning centuries of tradition, religious authority, and cultural control. This theme generates discomfort because it makes us realize that many truths may have been hidden, and that perhaps the real face of the Messiah has never been shown, not to shake power structures. Imagine the impact of millions of faithful around the world finding that the idealized image of Jesus is not based on facts, but on artistic conventions created centuries after his death. How would this affect faith? How would this change the way we see Christianity itself? What is most impressive is that the Bible itself gives us clues about it. In the book of Revelation, chapter 1, verses 14 and 15, we find a description of glorified Jesus that speaks of white hair like wool and feet like polished bronze. This often ignored image does not match the European profile portrayed in so many famous churches and paintings. Moreover, the people of Israel, during the time of Jesus, had physical characteristics very different from those we usually see in Western representations. In analyzing the geographical and ethnic context of the region, there is no denying that Christ's appearance would get much closer to someone with dark skin and typical Middle East or even Africans. Have you ever wondered why this subject is almost never discussed in the pulpits of the church? Why, despite so many historical and biblical evidence, is there an almost absolute silence about the true appearance of Jesus? The answer may be in the fact that institutionalized religion throughout history has sought to align with the ruling classes and current cultural standards. Portraying Jesus as a European man was a way of making him more acceptable to societies that shaped Christianity throughout the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. However, the truth cannot be hidden forever. Recent research and current discussions have challenged this vision, bringing to light a new understanding of who the true Messiah was. Another fascinating aspect is to realize that, behind this historical distortion, there is an attempt to erase not only the appearance, but also the cultural origin and revolutionary message of Jesus. The Messiah did not come from a powerful empire, but from a marginalized region, from a people who suffered oppression. Its skin color and real appearance represent not only a racial issue, but a direct connection with the excluded and those the world prefers not to see. When we realize this, we understand that Christianity has never been about power, wealth, or appearance, but about transformation, love, and justice. Perhaps this is the true reason this information was kept hidden. She reminds us that God chooses unlikely to accomplish great things. Think to me, if for centuries they taught us an idealized image of Jesus, what else may have been omitted or distorted? What other truths are waiting to be revealed? This is where we begin to realize that this video is not just about a historical discussion, but about a spiritual awakening. When we question these narratives, we are approaching the essence of faith, what really matters. The Black Messiah, which many try to erase, represents not only a skin color, but a story of resistance, real and love that cannot be silenced. Can you imagine what it would be like to look at a painting of Jesus with Afro-Semitic features and understand that this can be the closest face to reality? How would this mess with the foundations of traditional Christianity? Some people may even feel uncomfortable, but this discomfort is necessary so that we can see beyond what has been imposed. It is at this point that we need to open our mind and our hearts, for that God is not limited to human standards. Messiah's skin color does not diminish its importance at all. On the contrary, it makes us understand the depth of its message, which is universal and accessible to all, without distinction. And that is why this discussion needs to happen now. In a world marked by divisions, prejudice, and injustices, knowing the truth about Jesus is an act of liberation. This is not just about historical curiosity, but of rescuing an image that has been hidden to maintain some control over the masses. When you find that the Messiah may have been a black man, he realizes that the gospel message is even more inclusive and revolutionary than we would imagine. I want you to think about it. How would your faith be impacted if all the churches began to portray a Jesus with dark skin and traces of the Middle East? Would this change the way people relate to God? Comment down here with the word truth if you believe it is time to bring out all that has been hidden for centuries. Your opinion is important, and together we can continue this journey in search of the true history of the Messiah. Now get ready, because what I will share below goes even deeper into the historical and biblical evidence that confirms this mystery that has been hidden for 2,000 years. When we talk about the silence of the church in relation to the true appearance of the Messiah, we are not just dealing with carelessness or historical failure. We are talking about a carefully built strategy over centuries where images, icons, and paintings have been shaped to convey not only a spiritual idea, but also a political and cultural message. The question that remains is, why could this information, so important and that could change the way people understand the Bible, was set aside or completely ignored? The answer may be in something that many do not want to admit: the manipulation of faith to maintain intact power structures. In the early centuries of Christianity, Jesus was represented in many ways, with traits that reflected the diversity of the Middle East, where he lived. But with the expansion of the Roman Empire and, later, with the influence of Christianized Europe, these images were slowly replaced by representations that aligned themselves with the European aesthetic standard. It is no coincidence that the most famous paintings, such as Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, show a light-skinned Christ, light eyes, and straight hair. This choice was not only artistic but also ideological, because it reinforced the European cultural domain over Christianity. The Church, over the centuries, played a central role in controlling the narrative of faith. By presenting a Messiah with European traits, religious leaders reinforced an image of superiority and purity associated with the Western world. This process not only distorted historical reality, but also deleted the identity of a man who lived in a region with intense ethnic diversity and who most likely had dark skin and typical traces of the Middle East or even Africans. It is important to remember that Egypt and other parts of North Africa were central scenarios of biblical history, and many important figures of the Christian narrative were, in fact, black or Semitic. But does the Bible really hide this truth? No, the clues are there for those who want to see. In Jeremiah 8:21, for example, we find references about the skin color of people of that region. In Lamentations 4:7-8, there are descriptions that also challenge the Europeanized image that was so widespread. However, these passages are rarely commented on traditional sermons or Bible studies. Why will it be? Perhaps because admitting that the Messiah could have been black means to confront prejudice and racial structures that have been reinforced throughout history. We must not forget also the power of sacred art and religious media over the centuries. How many movies, soap operas, and plays have you seen where Jesus is represented as a blue-eyed man and light brown hair? This image has become so dominant that, for many people, questioning this seems almost a blasphemy. But the real scandal is not to raise this issue, but the fact that for 2,000 years, the story was told only from a point of view, ignoring the diversity and cultural richness of the time Christ lived. And don't think this has no impact on people's faith. The image of Jesus influences the way the faithful perceive and relate to him. By presenting a Messiah that does not look like marginalized communities or dark-skinned peoples, a psychological barrier is created that makes many unconsciously believe that God is closer to a European appearance than other ethnic groups. This is a deep and dangerous mistake that needs to be deconstructed so that we can connect with the historical and spiritual Jesus. Over the centuries, important documents that could shed light on this issue have been ignored or even destroyed. Apocryphal books, old texts, and unofficial historical accounts were banned from the scriptures we know today. Have you ever wondered why only certain books were chosen to compose the Bible? Was it just a matter of divine inspiration, or were there human interests involved in this selection? It is no coincidence that many of these texts talk about themes that could challenge the image that the church wanted to consolidate. The silence around the Black Messiah is not just an omission, it is a deliberate choice, a silence that speaks louder than any word. But today, with more access to information, archaeological research, and a new conscience awakening, you can no longer keep these truths hidden. And that's why this video is so important, because here we are breaking this cycle of concealment. Imagine if, since childhood, you had seen in churches and movies an image of Jesus with dark skin, deep eyes, and curly hair. Would this have changed the way people relate to it? Would racial prejudice have found so much space within human history itself? These questions lead us to reflect on how faith has often been used to serve interests that have nothing to do with the gospel. The church has always been afraid of losing control, fear of questions. But true faith is not shaken by the truth. On the contrary, it is strengthened. Knowing that Jesus could have been Black does not change the essence of his message, but it changes, yes, the way we look at humanity. This brings us closer to the idea of a God who is present in all, who is not limited to human standards of beauty or power. Can you feel the weight of this revelation? Can you imagine how many stories, how many images, how many teachings have been shaped to keep people stuck to a limited view? Comment down here with the word revelation if you believe it is time to expose everything that has been hidden. I want to see your opinion about it because your voice is fundamental to this dialogue. But prepare, because at the next point, we will dive even deeper into the historical and archaeological evidence that supports the idea that the true Messiah may have been completely different from what the official history has shown us. We know, when we observe the context of the Middle East for over 2,000 years, we see that the population of that region had well-defined ethnic characteristics with darker skin tones, strong traces, and wavy or curly hair. This alone contradicts the Europeanized figure that has been widespread by Renaissance art and Western culture over the centuries. It is important to understand that, at that time, Palestine was a meeting point for various Afro-Asian cultures, and commercial routes with North Africa influenced not only habits and clothing, but also the genetic diversity of the people living there. Studies of biblical archaeology, including analyses of remains of contemporary peoples to Jesus, reveal characteristics that would be much closer to a dark skin appearance, with strong features and hair similar to those of African and Semitic populations. It is amazing to realize how this reality is practically ignored in most religious representations we see today. Many anthropology experts claim that it would be almost impossible Jesus to have the appearance we know of European paintings, because first-century Jews were marked by a typical physiognomy of the Middle East regions. Moreover, it is curious to note that even old, often neglected texts describe important Bible figures with characteristics that refer to dark skin. Another interesting evidence is in the older traditions of African Christianity. In places such as Ethiopia and Egypt, where the Christian faith flourished in the early centuries, the representations of Christ and the apostles were much closer to an Afro-Asian reality. These peoples have never had a problem imagining a dark-trait Messiah because it was part of their cultural context. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, for example, still has icons of Jesus and Mary with dark skin and curly hair. This tradition, which survived for centuries, seems to be more aligned with the real historical context than the idealized images that emerged in Europe a long time later. Archaeological discoveries also bring powerful evidence. Paintings and frescoes found in old catacombs dated before the period when Christianized Europe has appropriated the image of Jesus show figures with much darker skin tones than we are used to seeing. Of course, these images were gradually replaced when Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. Thus, there was a deliberate effort for the figure of Christ to be portrayed as someone similar to European leaders, as a way of reinforcing the authority and legitimacy of the church. Not only did this erase the true story of a man born in a region of ethnic diversity, but also shaped the way entire generations understood spirituality. Have you ever wondered why, even with so many advances in science and archaeology, do we rarely hear about these evidence in the media or sermons? The truth is that this discussion is considered controversial because it challenges centuries of tradition and questions the images that many religious institutions prefer to maintain. When people find that Jesus may have been a dark-skinned man, it breaks paradigms and invites reflection. Is our faith based on who he really was, or the version they taught us? Another fascinating point is the historical connection with Egypt. We know that Joseph and Mary fled to Egypt with the baby Jesus to escape the persecution of Herod. If Jesus had a European appearance with extremely clear skin, he would have drawn attention among the Egyptians, which were dark-skinned. However, biblical accounts show that they lived there without any problem of identity or prominence, which reinforces the idea that their appearance was similar to that of the people of that region. This is an important detail that often goes unnoticed, but it makes perfect sense when we look at the reality of the time. In addition, several historical analyses indicate that Hebrew peoples were more culturally and ethnically linked to the African and Semitic tribes than to Europeans. This not only makes sense geographically, but also historically. The Old Testament's own narrative shows numerous interactions of the people of Israel with the African nations, either through Egypt, Ethiopia, or Nubia. These cultural and racial connections cannot be ignored when we think of the figure of the Messiah. With all this sum of information, it is difficult to continue accepting the romanticized image of a European Christ as a faithful representation of reality. This does not mean that skin color is more important than the message, but it means we need to be honest about history. Hiding these details is, in a way, manipulating the truth. And when we speak of faith, the truth should be the basis of everything. Now, I want to know about you. What do you think of this evidence? Do you believe that the true appearance of Jesus was intentionally erased from history to adapt to the standards of the time? Leave your opinion in the comments with the phrase, "I want the truth," because I want to know how many people are willing to go deep into this mystery. If you have come here, continue with me, because in the next part we will analyze how the Bible itself, in a subtle way, gives us signs and descriptions about the appearance of the Messiah, signs that are often ignored or conveniently forgotten by those who do not want these truths to come out. When we look at the Bible with a look attentive and free from superficial interpretations, we realize that it gives us some valuable clues about the appearance of the Messiah and others' appearances, prophetic figures. These clues, for some reason, have been ignored over time, as if they were not important. But the truth is that each word of Scripture was placed there by a purpose. And when we analyze these descriptions, they begin to reveal a very different image from the one we see in the paintings and sculptures that became popular. A clear example is in the book of Revelation, chapter 1, verses 14 and 15, where John describes his vision of glorified Christ. His head and hair were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes as a flame of fire. His feet were similar to polished bronze, as if refined in a furnace. This description is extremely symbolic and, at the same time, full of details about appearance and physical characteristics. If you stop to think, the text makes a point of comparing Jesus' hair to wool, not only to talk about white, but also about texture. Anyone who knows wool knows that it is thick, curly, unlike straight or wavy hair. Many scholars have already raised the hypothesis that this comparison is not accidental, but an indication of the Afro-Asian nature of the Messiah. Also, when the verse says that his feet had a polished bronze appearance, it clearly refers to a dark skin tone, something that does not fit the Ephersal image posted posterior. If the Bible says bronze as burned in a furnace, it is because the author wanted to convey the idea of a deep, hot, dark tone. This should at least make us rethink the representations we know. But it is not just in Revelation that we find clues about the appearance of important figures. In the Singing Book, for example, there are several poetic descriptions of dark-skinned characters, such as in the verse, "I am brunette but beautiful," Cantares 1:5. Although this text is not directly speaking of Jesus, he reflects the characteristics of the people of that region. In other books, such as Lamentations 4:8, we find phrases that describe men whose skins are darker than coal, which shows the racial diversity present in biblical texts. When we observe the historical and geographical context, everything points to a reality much closer to the mixture of African, Semitic, and Arabs people than the idealized European pattern. There is also an interesting curiosity. Have you noticed that at no time do the Gospels care about describing the color of Jesus' eyes or hair explicitly? It is as if this detail was so obvious to the early Christians that it was not worth mentioning. They knew that Jesus was a Middle East man, the son of a people with typical physical characteristics of the region, and this was no reason for discussion. It was only centuries later, when Christianity began to be dominated by European cultures, that Christ's appearance began to be shaped according to the aesthetic taste of each era, forgetting the biblical reality. Another important point is in the prophecy of Isaiah 53, where the prophet speaks about the suffering servant, a clear reference to Christ. Isaiah says, "He had no beauty or beauty, and looking at us to him, there was no look at him to wish him." This phrase shows us that Jesus was not described as someone with classic beauty traits or impressive physical characteristics, such as those that many Renaissance paintings have tried to pass. On the contrary, his greatness was in the spirit, in his message, and the love he demonstrated. This description also removes us from the idea of an imposing-looking Messiah or European standard, reinforcing the image of a common man of his time and region. It is amazing to realize how, despite these biblical clues, the image of Jesus was transformed into something completely different. If we are faithful to the Word, it is impossible to ignore that the Bible gives us signs that it had physical characteristics very close to what we today associate with African and Semitic peoples. The reference to the polished bronze is one of these keys. The choice of this metaphor was not by chance. It carries a very strong cultural and visual weight. Burned bronze, burned in furnace, refers to something intense, almost alive, and this should make us reflect. Why do we rarely hear someone quote this detail in sermons or Bible studies? Is it not interesting to provoke this questioning in people so that they understand that Jesus cannot be limited to a culturally manufactured image? Another important issue is that the Bible, in highlighting these characteristics, teaches us that God is not attached to a single form or appearance. The attempt to standardize the image of Christ not only disrespects historical reality, but also limits the understanding of his universality. The color of the skin of Jesus does not change his message, but we accept the truth about his appearance brings us closer to a more honest faith free of cultural manipulations. Perhaps that is why so many people are afraid to discuss this subject. It drops prejudice and breaks paradigms. Now, I want you to think and comment below. When you read Revelation 1:14 through 15 for the first time, did you realize how different this description is from the image we see in the pictures? Write, "I saw the truth" in the comments if you, like me, believe that these verses are pointing to something much bigger than we think. Continue to me, because then we will talk about the impact of this revelation and why it is so important to our faith and the way we see the spirit world. Have you ever stopped to imagine what would be the impact on the Christian world if this revelation about the true appearance of the Messiah came totally to light? Imagine millions of faithful who grew up believing in a carefully constructed and idealized image, suddenly finding that this representation has no solid historical basis. How would people react to knowing that Jesus could have been a dark-skinned man with typical Middle East or even Afro-Asian characteristics? This truth, embraced by all, would deeply shake many traditions and beliefs that were established for centuries. This is because we are not just talking about an aesthetic issue, but something that touches on their own identity, faith in the way people understand the sacred, and, above all, in how religion shaped its narrative to align with political and cultural interests. It must be understood that throughout history, the image of Jesus has been used as a powerful tool of influence. Representing the Messiah with European features reinforced the idea that power and spiritual authority were concentrated in the Western world. This vision fed not only religious control, but also justified prejudices, divisions, and even oppression practices. Now imagine this mask being torn, showing the world that Christ was nothing of what was so long painted. What would this do with the structures that are still based on this visual myth today? Would people have the courage to question what they have learned since children? Or would many prefer to close their eyes so as not to face such an impactful truth? We cannot underestimate how much this revelation would mess with the spiritual self-esteem of millions of people. Think of all dark-skinned communities that for centuries were taught to see the divine with a different look than yours, almost as if God is distant from them. The recognition of a black Messiah would have a powerful effect of inclusion and appreciation, showing that the sacred transcends any pattern imposed by the dominant culture. This could cure deep historical wounds, but would also generate resistance. Can you imagine how many religious leaders would have to review their sermons, reassess their teachings, and admit that they have hid or ignored this evidence for convenience? The impact would not only be religious, but cultural. Art, music, literature, and even cinema would have to face this new perspective. How many movies have you watched in which Jesus appears portrayed like a light-skinned man, blue eyes and straight hair? This image was so reinforced that for many it was impossible to imagine something different. To reveal to the world the real appearance of the Messiah would be almost like breaking a kind of collective enchantment that lasted for centuries. And this break could lead many to rethink not only who Jesus was, but what he really represents. Would the world be ready for it? Now, I ask you, what would your reaction be like when you enter a church and see a picture of Jesus with dark skin, curly hair, and semi-traces? Do you believe that people would continue to see with the same eyes the man who died and rose to save humanity? Or would there be resistance, shock, even rejection? These questions are important because they make us understand that true faith is not in the color of the skin, but in what he did, in the love he demonstrated, in the message he left. However, we cannot deny that the image shapes perception, and changing this image means provoking a revolution in the collective imagination. Many people can say, but it doesn't matter. What matters is what Jesus did for us. Yes, it is true. Christ's work is what really saves. But we need to understand that the truth matters. Truth frees. And denying who he really was, even in his appearance, is to deny part of the story. Therefore, this revelation bothers so much. It exposes not only historical distortion, but also the intentions behind those who control the narrative of faith for centuries. Think about it. If even the image of Jesus has been changed, what else may have been manipulated over time? What other truths were hidden to keep people under control? This is the reflection I want to bring to you today. It is not just about color, but of opening our eyes to the fact that we have been taught for a long time to see the spirit world through lenses that do not show us the complete reality. What if we take these lenses? What if we face the truth even if it is uncomfortable? I want you to comment below how you think the world would react if all the churches began to show a black Messiah, faithful to biblical descriptions and the historical context. Right, I'm ready for the truth if you believe this revelation is necessary for faith to become more genuine and transparent. I want to know how many people are really willing to face this discussion without fear. Continue with me, because in the next point we will deepen this reflection, entering a spiritual analysis of what this revelation means to our life of faith and how it can transform the way we see the message of Christ. When we look at all this discussion about the true appearance of the Messiah, it is impossible not to feel a mix of curiosity, surprise, and even indignation, because we lived so long with a possibly distorted image. But there is something we always need to keep in mind. As fascinating as it is to seek historical truth, the essence of Jesus' message remains much greater than any physical detail. He did not come into the world to be admired for his appearance, but to bring salvation, the truth, and transformation that no other man could offer. It is as if your true identity is far beyond what the eyes can see, and this is something we need to reflect deeply. Jesus has always made it clear that what really matters is the heart, faith, and the way we live according to God's will. In John 14, verse 6, he says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but for me." This is the essence of Christianity, and it does not change regardless of the color of the skin or physical traits of the Messiah. Of course, knowing historical reality is important because it connects us more to the truth, but we cannot allow it to lose sight of what it really represents. Think to me, would the strength of Christ's words less power if he was different from the image they taught us? The answer is no. The message is still the same, and that's what really changes lives. But understanding the truth can also lead us to a more mature spirituality. When we recognize that Jesus, the Son of God, was part of a marginalized, rejected, and even discriminated people, we can understand more depth the kind of love and compassion he preached. He identified himself with the oppressed, with the forgotten, with those the world often prefers to ignore. No wonder in Matthew 25:40 he says, "Indeed I say unto you, when you have done one of these my little brothers, you have done so." This shows us that the true focus of faith is not in appearance, but in the way we live and practice love. Have you ever thought that perhaps the fact that the true appearance of Jesus was hidden is also a way of reminding us that the most important has ever been aesthetics, but the purpose of your mission? When he came into the world, he sought no human glory or admiration for his appearance. On the contrary, he was rejected, humiliated, and even despised, just so that we could understand that the value of someone is not in what one sees, but in what one lives. The cross was the greatest example of this. That man, whom many did not value for his simple appearance, was the only one who could carry the sins of humanity upon himself. It is in this reflection that we find an invitation to look inside us. Are we not often arrested for labels and superficial images? Jesus calls us to go beyond, to see the truth with our hearts and not just with our eyes. His skin color may not change the meaning of his message, but recognizing that he has lived a different reality from what was presented to us can make us more conscious, more humble, and more open to the true gospel. And this is the central point. Faith is not based on an image, but on a real and transforming relationship with the living Christ. This revelation is also an opportunity to ask ourselves what we are really looking for when we talk about spirituality. Do we want a figure that fits our standards, or do we want the truth, even if it breaks traditions and takes us out of the comfort zone? Jesus always invited us to abandon illusions and follow a path of surrender, love, and faith. This is the essence of the gospel, and it remains intact, regardless of the lies that were told about the appearance of the Messiah. So I want you to do an exercise now. Close your eyes and think of Christ's message, not the image that was placed before you. Think about the words of love, forgiveness, and transformation he has left. This is the true identity of the Messiah, which changes lives and saves souls. His color of his skin does not add or take anything from the power of the cross. But knowing the historical truth helps us break down barriers and understand that God reveals himself in much deeper ways than those the world tries to impose. I want to know your opinion. Do you believe that, deep down, the most important thing is what Jesus represents and not how he was portrayed? Write in the comments, "The message is eternal," to show that you understand that the love of Christ is far beyond appearances. Also, leave your personal reflection on how this discussion stirs your faith. Stay with me, because then we will come to the most intense moment of this journey, an emotional climax that will make us look inside ourselves and question if we are ready to face all the truths that the Bible and history still have to reveal us. If you got here, it is because it really seeks the truth and is not afraid to question what has been hidden for centuries. So I want to ask you something special. Subscribe now on the channel. Activate the bell so you don't miss any of the next revelations, and leave your like so that more people are achieved by this powerful message. Your support is critical so that we can continue bringing content profundos, full of biblical mysteries and spiritual reflections. I also want to know who was with me until the end of this video. If you are one of those people, comment below the phrase, "I came to the end for the truth." So I will know that you are part of the sincere search engines that want to go beyond superficial versions and dive into the hidden truths of the Bible. And don't leave yet. There is another video now appearing on the screen, full of revelations that will further broaden your spiritual understanding. Click on it and continue with me on this amazing journey. See you there.